Welcome to Football Never Sleeps, the aspiring to be viral, still well caffeinated, and proudly sponsored by Academy Sports and Outdoors, weekly YouTube show all about Notre Dame football and a fan base still trying to concoct ways to bring Al Golden back to South Bend. I'm Eric Hansen. I'm already in South Bend and ready to pound my desk if needed during the show. He's Tyler James, counting up how many times Marcus Freeman has said the word execution this season. Together, we're the word salad avoiding content creators and schematic fixers at our new home, blueandgold.com. On tonight's show, the number 104 defense in the country, it's the soap opera that seems to have a really long shelf life. Or does it? Marcus Freeman got after it passionately today in the press conference. We'll do the same thing with your questions and comments, so start filling up the question portal. This is Football Never Sleeps.
Marcus Freeman was doing a lot. He was doing a lot of this. He was doing. Got to get those hand signals down.
Between Saturday and Monday, there is the new stat. I put this in my column: is lectern thumps.
All right, we'll keep our lectern thumps at a minimal. As Eric mentioned, Football Never Sleeps is now presented by Academy Sports and Outdoors. Huddle up, football fans. Tailgate season is here, and nobody gets you ready for game day like Academy Sports and Outdoors. Swing by your local Academy store or shop online at academy.com to find everything you need, from grills to jerseys and more. Be a watch party legend with gear from top brands like Nike and Under Armour, all at unbeatable prices every day. With 8 Academy stores across Indiana and a new store coming soon to Mishawaka, fun can't lose, and neither can you. Gear up today at Academy Sports and Outdoors. I hope everyone in the chat today has had a better Monday coming off a Notre Dame victory this past weekend. We appreciate everyone joining us live and interacting with us tonight. And thank you to those of you who are watching us on replay. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to our channel. The Hansen and James channel keeps creeping towards 5,000 subscribers, and we'd like to get there before the end of the football season. So if you guys could,
we'd like to get there by the end of the week, and we'll pound it if it'll help.
I don't want to put unrealistic expectations on us, Eric. But we appreciate everyone who watches, comments, subscribes, shares our content. That helps us continue to reach a broader audience. And before we get into today's topics, I want to make sure that you are aware of our subscription deal for new subscribers to blueandgold.com. We're now offering $1 per week for an entire year. So you can purchase an annual subscription to Blue and Gold for just $52, which is more than half off the regular price. If you head over to blueandgold.com, you can hit the Join Now button. It's at the top of the page, and that'll let you take advantage of this awesome deal. No promo code necessary. We want to get some new folks in the door and get them excited about the coverage we're doing over at blueandgold.com. I know one person responded to me saying they signed up, was asking for some help, and we had a nice message board post from a subscriber on the board, thanking our team for all the content we've been providing. So it's been a maybe not as fun start to the season on the football field for Notre Dame, but it's certainly been a fun first few months for us over at blueandgold.com. And if you want a direct link to sign up, there's a link to do that in the video description below our talking heads if you want to be just one click away.
And if you have trouble remembering the price, 52 is how many points the winner probably will need this Saturday.
All right. As Eric alluded to, Marcus Freeman spoke with reporters today to review the Purdue victory and start looking ahead at the upcoming road trip to Arkansas. As expected, much of the press conference was focused on the Irish defense. Eric, what were your biggest takeaways from the press conference?
Yeah, they were defensive related, but really culturally and Marcus Freeman related, and I wrote my column about that tonight. Very passionate, very candid remarks from Marcus Freeman. I thought he really gave some great answers to how his vision is for Notre Dame getting out of this. I call it fixing a mirage, because we felt like and so did he, in August, that this was going to be lather, rinse, repeat in terms of last year's defense that was 4th in the country in total defense, or 11th in the country in total defense, 4th in scoring defense. They're in the hundreds in both of those categories now. But to me, I'll single on this, and then we can fan it out later, is just his belief that this is about leaning into Notre Dame's culture. And the money quote for me today was they had a coaches meeting on Sunday and it was uncomfortable and he wanted it to be uncomfortable. I'd say the other thing that was a huge takeaway, since I just promised you one and I'm giving you two now, this is a bonus one, is that he's not going to start calling the plays. And he said if he felt like that was what was required, he would have no hesitation in doing that. How about your takeaways? See if you can do it more succinctly than I did.
To me, the biggest takeaway was that he still believes the play calling isn't the issue. I think it's important. Like, I think when folks hear that without context, that makes it seem like he doesn't believe the coaching staff has a role in the struggles. And I don't think that's his view at all. I think he, like you mentioned, he wanted the coaches staff meeting to be uncomfortable. He wants to challenge these guys to find better answers for the team, find a better game plan, find better ways to teach their players what they're trying to get them to do on Saturdays. And so I think there has to be, as the head coach, Marcus Freeman has to be the one to sort of diagnose where the issues are coming from, but he doesn't want there to be like public finger pointing necessarily, or even private finger pointing in the way that like someone is pushing blame off to someone else. He wants everyone to be accountable and is really pushing that message to his players, and I think even publicly through his comments as well. So I thought it was interesting to see Marcus Freeman sort of shift into almost like a speech, it felt at times during the press conference, in terms of like, this is how he feels, this is what he wants everyone to hear, even if they weren't necessarily everyone that was in the room.
Yeah, I thought it was heartfelt. I thought it was sincere, and it was very interesting to see him that passionate about it. And in my column I wrote, last year their mantra in the playoff was culture wins, and it wasn't just something to put on a keychain. And I think he believes in that culture, and he believes that it can kind of rescue them and eventually galvanize them into another run. We'll see if that actually happens, but he's got a very clear vision of what he thinks this is supposed to look like, and I think that's a good thing. And again, now it comes down to, Tyler, execution.
Yeah, what did you think of the way Marcus Freeman handled what it would require for him to become, or him or someone else to be the play caller? What did you think of the way he sort of handled that question that was asked of him?
I like it and I believe it. He's only in his fourth year as a head coach. There are other head coaches that have done that. Usually they kind of do that in the off season, but when we were talking to Rocky Boyman on our podcast a couple weeks ago, that happened mid-season in his last year at Notre Dame, where Bob Davie took it away from Greg Madison. And Mike Elko, who Notre Dame faced earlier this year, who's been a coordinator with the Irish, he took it away from Jay Bateman. He's the play caller now on Saturday. So it's something that can be done. And I really believe that Marcus would change that. I don't know that he'd be real, look at me, because that's how Bob Davie was. I mean, you knew exactly who was calling the plays. He was so demonstrative, it was almost like he wanted credit for it. But I think Marcus would do that if he thought that was best. But this is going to be Marcus Freeman's defense going forward, whether it's Marcus Freeman calling the plays or not, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think one of my views has been that Marcus Freeman already had a voice in this. This didn't all catch him by surprise.
I disagree that the defense caught him by surprise, but I think he wasn't silent. And if that's what you're saying, he wasn't silent until this week. But I think he thought the defense was a lot better in August than it has been.
No, yes, I agree. I think he misjudged
gotcha.
the defensive talent. I believe he had a voice in the structure and the
Right.
principles of this defense. This isn't just Chris Ash just came in and did whatever he wanted to do.
Right.
So I think part of that is that, like, yes, play calling is important, but they're also like, these are fundamental things that we think this defense should do, and we includes Marcus Freeman in that. And so will the Marcus Freeman part of that we be more and more as the weeks go on if the defense continues to struggle? I think it has to. But I don't think like Chris Ash is just pulling plays out of a hat that Marcus Freeman's never heard of or anything like that. I do wonder.
Look like that a couple times.
I do wonder, would Marcus Freeman tell us if he took over play calling? Do you think he would be transparent about that?
I think he would if he was asked. I don't think he would throw it out there and volunteer it. Again, I remember when Brian Vigorder got fired in 2016, and they had Greg Hudson was the interim offensive or defensive coordinator, and Mike Elston was up in the box. He was the linebackers coach at the time and went back to coaching defensive line after that season, but he was the linebackers coach that year. And Charlie Weiss actually called me and said, Greg Hudson's not the defensive coordinator. He goes, I'm watching it. It's the guy up in the box. Who's that? Is that Mike Elston? I go, yeah. He goes, that's who the defensive coordinator is. And Brian Kelly later admitted that was what was going on. But Brian Kelly didn't roll that out and say, yeah, Mike Elston is calling the plays. He didn't admit that until later. So I think Marcus is more open than Brian, but I don't think he wants to embarrass Chris Ash. He's not going to say, guess what? I'm calling the plays. It'll be if somebody asks him and notices it.
All right. Wanted to talk a little bit more about the culture aspect that you I think that was I haven't read what you wrote yet, but I think that was what you were writing about today.
Right.
What did you think? I like, to me, it felt like it wasn't just a statement to us, like sort of what I was getting at. Do you think the way he talked about the culture and the importance of that, do you think that his statements were made to sort of limit the amount of finger pointing that's being done publicly?
I think he would be happy if that was a accidental consequence of it. I think really what was at the core of that statement is what he really believes. He said he's experienced both scenarios where, and you look at Clemson right now, and you could say that's probably a team with some finger pointing going on, the way they're going down the toilet. But I think he experienced both sides of it. I think when he was at Purdue, ironically, he went through that scenario. And then when he was at Cincinnati in his first year as coordinator there and things weren't going great, they didn't point fingers. And then they became kind of a defensive, I don't want to say juggernaut, but they were pretty good on defense the rest of his time there before Brian Kelly hired him away. And even in 2021, when they had two bad games out of the chute, and he actually referenced the heat he got then, there was not finger pointing. There was that lesson that he learned at Cincinnati was really helpful for him. And so he knows what it looks like with both scenarios. So it's not just, let's not blame each other so the media thinks we're going to all sing Kumbaya together. I think he really feels like this is part of what he built this program to be, a program where they not only talk about team glory, they live it, and that they do stay together. And I do think it's a pragmatic thing more than it is, let's make the optics look good. How about you? What do you think, Tyler?
Yeah, I think some of the context that I received that in was sort of some of the tweets that Jay Blair, the father of Notre Dame freshman safety Jadon Blair, thing tweeted after the game on Saturday. Some folks brought those to our attention on our message board. I think he deleted at least one, maybe the most critical one of them. I don't know the exact wording of all of them, but it was at least calling into question some of the defensive game plan things that were going on with Notre Dame. He has since followed up by saying that he believes fully in Marcus Freeman. I think it's important to note, like, what a parent says and what a player believes don't have to be the same thing. Like, I don't. Right. So, like, that doesn't mean that that's what's going on in the locker room necessarily. But Notre Dame certainly doesn't want that kind of stuff going on in the locker room. I think it's certainly entertaining and fodder for folks like us and especially disgruntled fans who want to agree with that. But I don't think it's necessarily good for the program. And that was I don't know if Marcus Freeman had that in mind when he was talking about that, but that was something that crossed my mind when he was making some of those comments about the finger pointing.
Well, I think it's just the way of the world too. I mean, there's been former players that have, and we know one of them that have been pretty critical of Chris Ash. But let me speak to the Jay Blair part of that. That's garbage that he would do that. That as a parent, you need to have that conversation with the coach and not doing it on social media. I think that's a bad move by Jay Blair.
One thing that came up a couple times was how Notre Dame's defense played better in the third quarter against Texas A&M and Purdue. Is there anything that you think can be gleaned from that, or do you think it's more random?
That they played better in the third quarter. I think it's good that they, at least at halftime or in lightning delay time, were able to come up with some answers. I think Pete Sampson had a really good question about, I think it was Pete, that, Al Golden seemed to be able to get to that before halftime. What's kind of the key to unlocking that? And I think that's also a good point, that they need to be better in the second quarter. That seems to be a difficult quarter for them defensively. And you can't wait to halftime to make those adjustments. But again, the fact that there were some kinds of adjustments, I think, was a good sign. I think it was 286 for Purdue in the first half with total offense and 98 in the second half. So I do think that's encouraging. But, Arkansas is going to bring it. That's all I have to say. They're a better offense than Notre Dame's seen this year. Not a better team, but a better offense than what they've seen so far.
You think their offense in its entirety? I mean, I think you know the statement you're making, but just to clarify, they're better than Texas A&M's offense, you believe?
I think so. And statistically, now again, they haven't played the same teams, but I mean, Arkansas is better in all those categories: rush offense, pass efficiency, total offense, scoring offense, third downs. They're sixth and third down efficiency. They've been pretty consistent. Where they've killed themselves a little bit as turnovers, and defensively, they have a lot of the same problems Notre Dame has defensively. And they're in tight games, but that's a team that should be 4-0. That's a team that's good enough on offense. And I do think Taylen Green is a better quarterback than Marcel Reed. I do.
Yeah, I think Taylen Green being better than Reed is a fair comparison. I'm not sure that Arkansas's receivers are as good as A&M's receivers.
I don't think they're as good, but I think on the whole, that offense is better. And I think Taylen Green is one of the reasons. He's a nightmare. 6'6", 235 pounds. I mean, he's the real deal.
Circling back to my original question, I'll chime in on. I think in terms of the third quarter improvements, I think it could potentially be a good sign for the Tay Johnson and Adon Schuler safety combination. We saw that at its most effective against Purdue. And that's what we're expecting to see from Notre Dame moving forward in terms of Tay Johnson moving into the starting lineup. He started last week in place of Adon Schuler, and now will start next to him. So maybe that is a winning recipe for Notre Dame secondary. Certainly I can't imagine that solves all the issues that we've seen, but maybe some improvement there. And it just seems like there's with both games, it provides evidence that there are adjustments that can be made and improvements that can be made. And so maybe there's a reason to be, or at least believe in the possibility that it'll happen. I don't know that I would go as far as saying to be optimistic, because I think it needs to be proven more in terms of being optimistic. But I think there's a reason to have some hope that this defense could start to turn it around a little bit. One last thing I wanted to bring up specifically in terms of Marcus Freeman's comments was that he said, "You learn from being exposed sometimes." That was a direct quote. Right. I think that can probably be applied to every season for Notre Dame under Marcus Freeman's tenure. Should that be a long-term concern about Freeman as a head coach?
That he said you can learn from being exposed, or the fact that they were exposed?
The fact that they've been exposed, and that's what's been required of them to learn.
I think where I actually asked the question that led to him saying that, and what I was getting at was, is there some flaw in the preseason process that allowed this to be more of a mirage than it could have been, that it really took, and then he tried to explain that part of it, and then got into some really good quotes. But what I think is fair is that preseason structure, they need to find out more. I do think that there's some things only games can teach you, but I also think, that some of the things that fly around on our message board where people are asking the questions, I think are good questions. For example, Pete Byrne and I were talking about today when I went over and did a TV hit with them, was did they put so much into creating chaos for Kenny Minchie and CJ Carr in practice that they weren't testing their defense enough against that offense? There was so much of a highlight on the quarterback competition that maybe, again, the assumption was, well, these guys were really good last year. We didn't dig deep enough to find the flaws in the preseason. And there's some other things conclusions that you could jump to too. And that's what I was trying to get with that question, because Marcus Freeman does question everything. And I do think in the offseason, he'll look at that. But I do think there's some value in looking at that now and helping them map out the particulars behind the cultural part of this and fixing this defense. And how do you do that in a game week? How do you do that when you're trying to put in certain things for certain players? Can you make those incremental improvements? In 2021, Marcus Freeman was able to as a defensive coordinator, so maybe he can do that as a head coach.
Yeah, the reasons for slow starts each season don't have to be the same every time. It doesn't have to necessarily be a recurring issue. I think the hope as the head coach would be for you to identify if there is something that's a recurring issue. It does seem like there have been instances where they're overestimating the talent at a specific positions, or the ability or the competency of a secondary's ability to run a certain coverage, or a front four's ability to pressure the quarterback. Why? And so my question would be, so why isn't there being enough done in the spring and in the preseason to expose those issues so they can better prepare for them? I don't know that that's a question that can be answered by either of us, or maybe even Marcus Freeman.
Well, I mean, that was a question I posed to him today.
So I think that's why it's a concern moving forward. All right, let's get to some of the questions in the chat. Eric Swope says, regarding playoff possibilities outside of winning all the rest of their games, should we worry about style points moving forward?
Eric, I saw that you kind of posed that question on my Facebook page on Saturday or Sunday, and it inspired my Behind the Ballot lead column. And I do think it's interesting because what should style points look like? What do style points look like for this team? And I don't think it's running up the score necessarily against teams. I don't think that's what style points look like for this Notre Dame team. Yes, win all your games, but two, find the real fixes to this defense, because when the committee starts paying attention, and their first poll isn't until November 4th, they're going to be looking at, has Notre Dame distanced itself from its early season problems? And they were able to do that last year. Nobody was saying, but they lost to Northern Illinois. They were saying, this isn't the same team. The script, though, was flipped. It was the offense that had the big evolution to make during the season. This year, it's the defense. So I think real fixes on the defense and really distancing themselves. And also the offense getting better. I mean, you look at where CJ Carr is going, and you look at the pieces around him improving. That can also create a different impression with the committee, because when you're a 10-2 team trying to get an at-large berth, they are splitting hairs, and those are the ones that I think Notre Dame would be the most successful with. So again, it's not putting undue pressure on the team. It's aligning with what Marcus Freeman says about reaching your full potential. And so you don't do scoreboard watching, you work towards reaching that full potential.
Yeah, I don't know that style points should be maybe fans can be concerned about it. I don't think Notre Dame needs to be concerned about it. I think Notre Dame just needs to win all of its games and see how things fall from there. I think, and personally, but I think the biggest thing, besides obviously assuming Notre Dame wins the rest of its games, which is obviously a big assumption, the thing that will impact Notre Dame's ability beyond that is how good Miami and Texas A&M are at the end of the season. And Notre Dame has no control over that. So I don't think it needs to worry about style points. It needs to take care of winning football games, and its resume will reflect what the rest of the teams do on it. All right. It's not working. Bob Alvey said, could some of our pressure issue be due to the fact of using interchangeable defensive ends instead of specific sides with a big end?
Maybe, although I haven't seen a lot of those guys switching back and forth. I mean, Botello's been over on the other side, even though Notre Dame continues to list him as a backup behind Traore. He started the last two games on the opposite side. I mean, Bob, I don't think that's a crazy question in terms of have the responsibilities of those defensive ends changed that much. I don't know. When we were watching practices, and again, we didn't see much 11 on 11, but we did see some drills, and those guys that are on the Viper side in general would go work with the linebackers for a couple periods. So I do think that there was some differentiation. But again, maybe that's part of them playing hesitantly. Maybe there's more confusion about it. I mean, that might be one little ingredient in it. I don't think that's a bad thought.
I don't think that is much of an issue. To me, if there would be an issue of it, it would be in the running game, in that you are maybe playing smaller defensive ends and your big ends aren't holding up against the run as well. The Vipers are supposed to be your best pass rushers, and so if you're playing Jordan Botello and Boubacar Traore together and they're starting, those should be your best pass rushers. And so I don't know that taking one of them off the field would necessarily increase Notre Dame's ability to rush the passer. Certainly, we have high expectations for Bryce Young that haven't been met yet. He got his first sack this past weekend, so maybe he starts to turn the corner there. I'm just not sure that I've seen enough to indicate that would be part of the issue. I think
I wholeheartedly disagree. This isn't about players. This is about scheme, and that's what I was trying to answer with Bob. It's not Jordan Botello is on the wrong side. It's they're being coached differently. Their responsibilities are different, and I think that's what he was getting at. But let's go ahead and move on.
All right, I will let you disagree. Can the DBs start jamming receivers on the line, says Scott Fegan. The line will benefit. Also, we look really bad when the DBs are running behind the receivers in their routes.
Sure, they can do press coverage, and Notre Dame does do press coverage at times. It just depends on the situation and who the receivers happen to be and who the DBs happen to be. And so, it's not, let's do this every play and this will solve everything, or let's not do it every play and it'll solve everything. I could see what the point was in the Texas A&M game, for example, in giving those guys a little bit of a cushion, meaning Carver and or Craver and Casey Concepcion, because you didn't want them running right past you. You wanted Marcel Reed to have to work his way down the field. I could understand it with that, but I do think that there's occasions where being handsy at the line of scrimmage makes some sense, and Leonard Moore's spoken to that as well.
Yeah, I think Leonard Moore is the defensive back who's best at that, and he wasn't out there last game. I think Christian Gray hasn't been as good of it in limited instances this season, and maybe there's a concern there, and that's why they're doing it less, that they don't want to put him in those positions. But I think that that's probably their best strength, at least those two guys. I can understand if maybe like younger guys like Mark Zachary and Dallas Golden, you don't want them to do it as much, and maybe they're not as physically able to do it as well. But I think that has to be a part of the package for Leonard Moore and Christian Gray. Mike DeVoy says, it sucked that NBC dumped the game over to Peacock with more than a quarter to go in favor of the Big Ten. Is there something in the contracts that gives Big Ten priority? Nobody subscribes to Peacock.
I'm not sure exactly what the contract says, but I believe the last time Notre Dame had a lightning delay, or one of the times they've had a weather delay here recently, it went the same way. The game finished on Peacock and CW that particular time. I remember reading up on that. And I think it's just the fact that this was a game that was a blowout, and the Indiana-Illinois game ended up being a blowout, but it was not anticipated to be. It was anticipated to be within a one touchdown game. It was two teams that were ranked versus just one of them being ranked in the Purdue game. And so I think objectively, most TV executives would make that decision. Although if I were a Notre Dame fan, I'd be ticked off. Yep.
Yeah, I think they want you to subscribe to Peacock, and that's why they do that. They want to give Indiana and Illinois the big stage when it's a competitive game still. I don't have the facts in terms of I have not checked out when the game switched over. I'm not sure if the opening kickoff for Indiana Illinois was on NBC or not. It just that wasn't a priority for me to figure out. But I don't know what's in the contract, but obviously they're going to do what they feel like is best in terms of holding its audience. And I'm not sure that NBC felt that it needed to hold an audience at the end of a Notre Dame Purdue game that was a blowout. Scott Fegan says, where does Mickens fit in all this? He had the best secondary, and now they are near the bottom.
I think he's still part of the solution, and I still think he's one of the best, if not the best, defensive backs coach in the country. And if you talk to former players, they will say the same thing. So he can certainly be part of the solution. And when you looked at how well, even though it was up and down, how well two true freshmen played together in the defensive backfield and a redshirt freshman, that was pretty impressive, even what they gave up. They also had some really good moments. And again, that was the first time that three defensive players made their first career start together on an Irish defense since 1972. So it doesn't happen very often. They were all in the defensive backfield. So I would give Mike Mickens credit there. And again, I think eventually we will be singing Mike Mickens praises again, but I think he's part of the solution.
Yeah, I think his resume speaks for itself in terms of his ability to have guys ready and develop them. I think certainly there seems to be some sort of gap in the teaching and understanding of what Notre Dame is trying to do defensively. And I don't know where that blame lies. I think it's probably a shared blame. If Chris Ash is intending to run a coverage scheme of some kind, it's incumbent upon Mike Mickens to make sure that he's coaching it to the best of his abilities and making sure that his players can understand how to execute that. And so that's what Notre Dame has to continue to work on and try to fix. Matthew Short says, when will defensive recruits start questioning their commitment?
I don't know. I mean, Tyler deals with the recruits more than I do. The thing that I'll say is, I think with NIL and rev share and all that stuff, I don't know that kids are as jumpy in terms of their commitments. And I also think Marcus Freeman has bought himself some equity with getting a team to a national championship last year, with how good his defense was when he was the coordinator, with how good the defense has been year after year for a while at Notre Dame. I mean, in the post Brian Van Gorder era, Notre Dame's defenses have been pretty good. And so I think he can sell them on, you know what, we're going to get to the answers, and just the way he conducts himself. I mean, if I were a parent or a recruit watching today's press conference, I'd be pretty impressed that a guy was taking the accountability and not saying, well, it's all Chris Ash's fault. I don't know what the guy's doing. So I think I wouldn't be sweating it at this point.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I can say this with 100% certainty, but I'm fairly certain that every defensive recruit did not commit to Notre Dame because of Chris Ash. He was not the number one reason. He probably wasn't the number two reason. He probably wasn't the number three reason. Obviously, the belief that Notre Dame can play good defense was part of that. And I think a lot of that belief will stem from their belief in Marcus Freeman. I think there's always a way you can spin it in recruiting. You can say, hey, look, we just played 2 freshmen as starters the other day. We're willing to let you play. If you're better than those guys, we're going to play you right away. Look at this as an example. Or you can say, hey, we need you. Like that's why we recruited you, is because we think you're better than what we have. So I mean, I think there's almost always going to be guys that question their commitment, because that's just how recruiting works. But I don't know that we've reached a stage where the play on the field is going to start doing that. Now, if Notre Dame continues to lose games, then it might be harder to keep those guys committed. But I think even if Notre Dame wins games in a close fashion and the defense is still struggling, I still think it can hold on to the vast majority of those commitments. All right, Jimmy Page asked, will Leonard Moore and Devontae Smith be back this week? So I figured that would be a good segue into our availability updates. Cornerback Leonard Moore, nickelback Devontae Smith, and kicker Noah Burnett remained questionable for this weekend's game, according to the Notre Dame availability report. We also learned that defensive tackle Jared Dawson, who didn't play at all against Purdue, was held out because he missed some practice at the end of last week with an undisclosed injury. He was technically available, but only in case of emergency, per Marcus Freeman. So to get to Jimmy's question, we don't know if that will happen this week, at least as it relates to Leonard Moore. When I asked a question about whether or not Leonard Moore could be used to just sort of follow the opposing team's best receiver, Marcus Freeman left the door open in the possibility that Leonard Moore could play. It seemed like Devontae Smith was closer to playing based on going through warmups this past weekend. So that could be a good sign that potentially maybe both of those guys are available this week. I don't know if you have any other insight on that to add, Eric.
We will. We get a update on Thursday. So, and I always have that in my notebook on Thursday. So check back on Thursday, and we'll update our depth chart projection on Thursday. Mike Singer, our colleague, did a really great job of getting some great intel last week where he was able to float what he thought might happen in the secondary with regard to those injuries. So if you're on the Loose Emoji message board, I'd check out Mike's reporting because he did a great job with that last week.
Circling back to Dawson, how badly do you think Notre Dame needs him?
Well, I think every healthy body in the interior defensive line helps. I mean, the one thing that Marcus Freeman mentioned, and I would agree with him, was I noticed Hughes in that game. When he was playing, it was noticeable that he was doing a good job, and I think he got a pretty good grade from Pro Football Focus. But I think a veteran guy like Dawson, who has some burst, especially with the elusiveness of the quarterback that they're going to see this week in Taylen Green, and Marcus was talking about, we're not so worried about him leaking out to the sidelines. We're more worried about that B gap escape up the middle. Jared Dawson, I think, would be helpful with that. So, I mean, a veteran guy like that, he was impressive in the Miami game. I'm looking forward to seeing that version of him if he's back this week.
Yeah, I agree about his performance against Miami. I thought he was less impressive against A&M, so I think we were a little bit uncertain. Like, was he benched or was he unable to play? So it'll be interesting to see what Notre Dame can get out of him moving forward. Like, is he capable of repeating performances like he had against Miami? I thought Elijah Hughes played well in his absence, but I think they need Dawson to play at a higher level, and I think the more bodies that they can have in there playing at a high level, the better for Notre Dame. Do you think? What did you think about my question to Marcus Freeman? Do you think that Notre Dame should have Leonard Moore chasing the opponent's best receiver when he returns?
I thought it was a brilliant question, and not just buttering you up. We talked about it a little bit on our roundtable show Sunday. I wondered about that, and we were even talking about it in the press box a little bit on Saturday. Because it felt like last year a lot of the really good receivers Notre Dame faced once Leonard Moore was thrown into the fire were boundary receivers, and Jeremiyah Smith would have fit that profile, but they flipped him in the Ohio State game. Leonard said he had very few, if any, reps against Jeremiyah Smith in that championship game. It was Carnell Tate instead, and I think it's definitely something. I had it on my question list to ask, and so I'm glad you did. And I think it's something Notre Dame needs to look at. They did it toward the end of the Miami game, not flip-flopping sides of the field, but he was on Malachi Toney, the slot receiver, a little bit toward the end of that Miami game. The other thing that was interesting to me, and Tyler, I think we talked about this on our post-game takeaway show Saturday night, was Christian Gray looked pretty comfortable on the boundary. And so, again, if those guys have practiced in the offseason, which they said they have, I think it makes sense if you've got an All-America cornerback to put him on the other team's best receiver.
Yeah, I think it makes sense too. I think you have to make sure that he is capable of doing that. I think like teams can do different things to try to avoid him being used in coverage against their best player. And certainly, like Marcus Freeman suggested, you don't want to, unless you're playing man the whole time, and I don't think that Notre Dame wants to do that. You're going to be giving that away too if you have Leonard Moore follow that guy and he follows him in motion all the time, or he's following him on different sides of the field. I think you can still like disguise some zone coverages into that, and he can still play to that side of the field, but then end up playing zone. But there are, I think, intriguing possibilities as it relates to that, and what you said with Christian Gray being maybe a better boundary receiver right now in his career. So I think Notre Dame has some interesting options there once it gets everyone healthy. That's the unfortunate part, is that they have not been fully healthy in the secondary. Speaking of that, if and when Devontae Smith comes back healthy, do you think that Dallas Golden has landed him a spot into the rotation now?
Absolutely. I think he plays. I mean, they were splitting the reps between Carson Hobbs and Devontae Smith in the first couple of games. But I think, yeah, he definitely has. And even Notre Dame, which is very slow to update their official depth chart, they moved Carson Hobbs out of the nickel position. They have Dallas Golden, at least that's the number 2 guy. Carson Hobbs is over as one of the depth pieces on the boundary side. But Marcus Freeman spoke very highly of Dallas Golden, both after the game Saturday and today. And I think he's certainly earned some playing time, and I think he'll be valuable. I mean, he's everything. You know, when you hear this recruiting hype, sometimes you're like, okay, well, I'll believe it when I see it. And I saw enough of it where I go, okay, yep, I'm seeing it. Yep, that's the guy. So I was impressed with him, and I was impressed with how humble and unselfish he was. Like, I mean, a guy that just learned to play nickel on Monday. Thought that was pretty impressive.
All right. Let's get back into some questions from the chat. Scott Fegan says, I guess for the foreseeable future, the offense is going to carry the team. Does the offense have enough power to carry ND to a 10-win season? Can the defense make enough stops against USC and others?
Well, Scott, if we have the question to the answer to that, we need to go to Las Vegas, because I think, again, it's the reverse of last year's script, except it was expected last year. There was an expectation that the offense was going to lag going into the season, and that was a race against time till they got to a point where it was a complementary piece instead of, you know, kind of driving with the parking brake on. And this year, I think the defense was a surprise, but I think it's the same kind of race against time, because you have some really good passing offenses coming up in USC, and in Boston College is number 1 in the country in pass offense right now. So there's some good passing offense coming up. Certainly Arkansas is good at both parts of the offensive structure. Do I think the offense is good enough? You know, the Purdue game was the game that kind of lent me to believe it was a possibility, not necessarily a probability, but where I thought, okay, well, maybe they can win some 50-40 games or 38-35 games. But they're going to have to play clean. You still have a very small margin of error, in that you can't lose the turnover battle. And that's one of the things Notre Dame did very well against Purdue, is they just kind of wore them out, because Purdue's offense was having a lot of success. So my short answer is yes, I do believe, but that defense has got to get better. We can't be having this conversation in November. Otherwise, they're going to be going home in the first round of the college football playoff if they get in.
Yeah, I'm very interested in like how great this offense can be. I really think it has a high ceiling, and I think it's sort of being raised by the week. The running game has the potential to be really good. I think we all knew that coming into the season. I think a lot of us believe that CJ Carr could elevate the passing game with the help of some receivers. And we've started to see signs of that. They have to do it consistently. CJ Carr still has had enough freshman mistakes that maybe come back to haunt Notre Dame in closer games like they did when they lost games. Certainly you're not blaming CJ Carr for the losses to Miami or Texas A&M, but if he makes one less mistake, maybe Notre Dame wins both those games in each of those games. So that's unfortunately for Notre Dame, that's the margin that Notre Dame's defense has put it in. But I do think as this offense continues to get better, it can be one that can help Notre Dame win shootouts and be a team that maybe has to learn to get comfortable in those kind of situations, because that hasn't necessarily been what it's been under Marcus Freeman.
A good example to think about this is the 2015 team. There were 2 really bad stretches of defense. I mean, there were a bunch of them, but there were 2 where it cost Notre Dame a playoff spot. First one was at the beginning of the Clemson game. They couldn't figure out Clemson's offense. They got way down. They came back and almost won that game, or at least almost sent it to overtime. And then the end of the Stanford game, just letting Stanford go down the field in less than a minute, kick the game-winning field goal. Otherwise, Notre Dame's in the college football playoff that year. So it never got better that year. And that's why I think at some point we do need to see some incremental processes, or it's going to come back and bite them.
JJ's Gene says, watching the defense against Purdue, it didn't give me confidence that this team can improve enough to rattle off 10 in a row. Can you try to change my mind?
Where I would try to change your mind is that I think that there's a lot of talent on this team, and a lot of it showed last year. We're seeing players that last year aren't as effective in this scheme as they were in the old scheme last year. And again, with Marcus Freeman's conviction to be involved in this, I think we're going to eventually see those players back where we had seen them before. Example is Jalen Sneed is a guy that I think has way more gas in the tank than what we've seen so far. But he's not the only one. I think there's other players. So that would be my stab at trying to convince you that they can go 10-2 with an improving defense.
Yeah, I don't know that I can change your mind based off the Purdue game. If Notre Dame plays well against Arkansas defensively this weekend, I think that could be, maybe that pushes you into having more confidence. The only other thing I would add that Eric didn't say is just I just think Notre Dame has played its best two opponents already. And so that increases Notre Dame's likelihood of being able to do that, because its two losses are against the two best teams on its schedule. Irish for Life 99. So will Chris Ash use our heat-seeking missile in KVA as a spy against Green and neutralize him like they did against Texas A&M?
Marcus didn't seem like he was all that pleased with how the spy concept came out against Texas A&M. I think if they do use a spy, it won't be every third down passing situation. But so I'm not going to vote that will happen. Maybe it was just trying to throw Arkansas off. But I do think that what Notre Dame will do is if he is going to run, get him out to the edges. He had a good point. Purdue's quarterback a lot of times was gashing Notre Dame up the middle with runs. And so I would have KVA on the field. I'm just not sure I would employ him in the spy role, because I think he's really, really good.
Yeah, I think you can't be predictable. There were some things that Notre Dame was doing towards the end of the A&M game. I thought that maybe disrupted Marcel Reed a little bit and also limited his ability to run. So maybe they could do that with some sort of like a late blitzer coming around the edge, or a late stunt coming around the edge that sort of is getting them in the face of the quarterback, rather than just sort of sitting there waiting to see if the quarterback is going to run. But yeah, I think Kingston Viliamu will be part of the answer there. But as we saw against Purdue, Notre Dame linebacker rotation is only growing with Matt and Framo getting in the mix. So they're they either, or it's probably not an either or, but that means they like what they're seeing from Matt and Framo, but there's also probably a belief that they can get more out of their linebacker play as well. And so I think linebackers is third on the list in terms of secondary and defensive line, ahead of them in terms of whatever order you want in terms of Notre Dame's pass defense struggles. But I think the linebackers can help with the pass rush and containing Taylen Green. Matthew Short says, what's the best stadium concession you've had this year? And I know Eric's answers.
I don't even know my answer. You mean
just food? Just not concession. Don't think of it concessions wise, because we don't go to. Folks might not know, we don't go to a concession stand during the game. They have food in the press box for us.
Okay, so press box food. for me, it was the lightning delay green beans. So they were very, very good. The best green beans I've ever had in my life.
Yeah, I thought the green beans were good. The mashed potatoes were good. By the time I wrote a story about the delay and stuff, I had not eaten yet because they normally bring out food at halftime, and that was essentially everyone's halftime. But they were out of the turkey by the time I got there, so I had an unintentional vegetarian halftime lightning delay dinner, but it was good nonetheless. John K says, without naming names, any concerns on any players declaring a red shirt before the fourth game?
Wow, I hadn't even gone down that road, so I'm going to pass on that question. I mean, nobody jumps out at to me as somebody that would be obvious, but so I'm going to pass. I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah, I would point out that it would happen after the fourth game rather than before the fourth game because you can play in 4 games and still redshirt. But I think there's probably always a concern of that, but I don't have any indications of that. I don't
know how that affects rev share either. I mean, if you're quitting on your team to redshirt, it's different than if it's a coach's decision or a mutual decision. If you're saying, hey, I'm going to go in the portal, I want a redshirt, you wonder if that would affect that.
Yeah, I don't know what they can legally include in rev share agreements that would not make them employees, because that would seem to be like an employee agreement if they have to play in order to get the money. So I don't know what the terms of the rev share agreements are, but the instances you see this more in typically are the guys that are later in their career that want to reserve a season because they feel like, well, I only have so much time left in my career, I don't want to waste it here. So maybe that would be, maybe there are a couple guys that are veteran players that maybe aren't playing right now that think, you know what, there's a chance that I'm going to be asked to do more special teams work, and I don't know that that's how I want to spend the second to last my college.
A lot of those guys have redshirted at some point because they didn't play early in their career.
Yeah, so it's harder to find those instances. So I haven't sat and looked at a list or have any names in mind, but that would be sort of the category you're looking at there. Mike DeVoy says, if Charles Jagusa were to come back in the next couple of weeks, does Knapp become the number 6 lineman? If so, Jagusa or Lambert moves to left tackle?
That's a great question. Based on Marcus Freeman's answer today about Anthony Knapp, I would be less sure about my answer, but I'm going to say Charles Jagusa is the left tackle.
Yeah, I think if I don't necessarily believe that that's what will happen, but if Notre Dame does move Knapp out of the left tackle, Jagusa rather than Lambert, I'm not sure what Notre Dame, or did I? Yeah, I said that right. I'm not sure what Notre Dame's going to do. As far as we know, Charles Jagusa still isn't practicing yet. So this isn't something that's right around the corner. I know that's something we get asked about almost on a weekly basis of how soon he'll be back. We don't have a firm timeline on that, but if he's not practicing, then it's not imminent by any means. But it's an interesting question. And I think I wonder if we'll get a chance to talk to Joe Rudolph before that scenario unfolds, or if they'll hold him until after that scenario unfolds.
And how somebody is playing on September 20th or 27th might look different at the end of October. Sure. So.
All right, Beefeater ND08. Eric, can you ask Chris Ash if he has tried calling plays up in the box and under the desk in fetal position? Can't be any worse than having him on the sidelines.
I did ask him about box versus sideline preference. He didn't give me a real expansive answer, and I didn't include the fetal position part of the question. But I think the iPads make it more desirable for a lot of coaches to want to be on the sidelines because they can see they can see the press box viewpoint up there, and they can also interact with their players on the sideline. But that was a really well worded question that you get. If I had a fabulous prize to send you, I could send you the Purdue game program.
All right. Is there anything? We've hit an hour here, Eric. Is there anything that we haven't discussed that you think we should get to before we get out of here?
I would just say one thing that I'm very encouraged by with this team is CJ Carr's development and the wide receivers development. I mean, we knew that the running game was going to come along, and they were really, really good against Purdue. But I think Marcus said it really well. The running game is going to open up those deep shots, and the deep shots are going to open up the running game. We're getting probably a little bit faster on that timeline than even the coaches thought, and I can't wait to ask Mike Denbrock about that tomorrow night.
Yeah, he probably volunteered to be interviewed this week after that performance. I was personally like it. It was great to see the development of both the running game and the passing game this past weekend. I think the more important one was the passing game because I just think we knew that the running game would eventually get there because there was just too much talent, and we just need to see it from CJ Carr and these receivers, even if we believed that it was possible, and we're seeing it more and more. I'm certainly gaining more confidence in the passing game by the week. It looks like Notre Dame is as well. And certainly I think CJ Carr is playing that way too. So I think the offense is going to make the rest of this season interesting if the defense hasn't already made it uninteresting to those folks.
Yeah. It's really important that they be able to do both because especially with the defense not being up to snuff yet, because there's going to be times where they're going to want to chew clock and slow it down. And there's going to be times they're behind and they need to chuck it down the field. And that they're being able to be good at both of those things, I think is really, really going to pay benefits for this team.
Chris asked for any recruiting updates. I don't have anything to provide, but just right now over on the Blue and Gold channel, Mike Singer is now live with Robbie Toma. So maybe if you want to head over there and ask Mike for any updates, you would have a better insight into that right now than I do. I just put a link to their show in the chat. We appreciate everyone tuning in to us tonight for Football Never Sleeps. Head over there to finish your evening if you'd like. And we'll be back with the Third and Gold podcast later this week, and hope everyone has a good week.